Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to everyone who's just joined us. I'm Mary Murphy. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Bay Area Council Housing Committee, along with Dave Hopkins. I'm a partner at Gibson, Dunn Crutcher, and Dave, I think as you all know, is with Sares Regis, and we're really delighted to be hosting this Bay Area Council's Impact Bay Area webinar series, where we're exploring the region's most important issues, and specifically today, we're really focusing on housing because this is the Housing Committee, and we're very, very lucky today to have with us two really great guests who are going to be helping guide us through this discussion. I'm going to turn this over to my co-chair, Dave, who's going to be moderating this part of the webinar. And Dave, if you could introduce our guests, that'd be great. So I'm handing it over to you, Dave.
All right, thanks, Mary. Good morning, and we're very excited for this session. My job as moderator, I think, is to keep us on time and to keep us to the plan, which is to open this up for Q&A roughly after 40 minutes of discussion. So I will do everything I can to leave that time and make sure that we can have some interactive back and forth. Hopefully there's some good questions that will come out of this. To do so, you're going to want to use the Q&A chat function there at the bottom of the screen. Most folks are probably familiar with that. Just type it in there and we'll get to all the questions that come to us. So speakers today are California's very new Housing and Community Development Director, Gustavo Velasquez, and Zillow's Senior Economist, Cheryl Young. And I'm going to start by introducing Cheryl, but clearly we've got a great sort of breadth of experience between the two of them that is going to be really interesting to go back and forth with and think about where we are, where we find ourselves right now, and look ahead as best we can. So I'll first introduce Cheryl. Like I said, prior to joining Zillow Group, she was a consultant with the World Bank's Urban Development Unit. She served as an associate with Thankful Frontier Associates Housing Finance Practice, led a housing research program at the Center for Development Finance, which is a think tank in India, and was a project manager for New York City's Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Cheryl holds a PhD in City and Regional Planning from UC Berkeley, Master's in Public Policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and a BA from Columbia University. So welcome, Cheryl. Thank you very much for joining us. And I know you have a few slides, and I'm going to hand it to you to go through those and give us an overview of what you see happening in the local rental and for sale housing markets here in the Bay Area.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, and to the Bay Area Council for organizing this sort of timely event. Let's see if I can get this going here. I think I'm having some technical difficulties.
Something happened.
Here we go.
You got it.
I think, like I said, thank you for Bay Area Council for organizing this. What I'm going to do here is sort of kick things off and try to set the stage in terms of what we're seeing in the housing market, particularly as it pertains to recent months where, sort of the pandemic has taken hold. What I want to do first is sort of talk about, what we're seeing right now and how that compares to what we normally see in the housing market. So you just go to the first slide here. Right now we're seeing something really interesting. I think the housing market in particular, with the economy sort of reeling right now, the housing market is actually doing well in terms of home prices. So median list price is way, way up, and this is really startling, right? So in those dark blue lines that we see, that's 2019. Typically what we see is a run up in terms of prices as we enter sort of home buying season, which is sort of spring, summer, and then they kind of ease back down as we go into fall and winter. But we're seeing a real divergence in that right now. We're seeing list prices still way, way up. And the reason for that is that inventory is super low. So nationally, inventory is down almost 30%. So there's just really not a lot out there. And what's happening is that buyers are really back. All that pent up demand, we see a lot of pressure usually kind of let off during home buying season. But this time, people have just been waiting, waiting in the wings. And now that they're ready and mortgage rates are so low, they're just not seeing that much out there. And sellers aren't ready to sell. And I think there's a few reasons for that. The first is that sellers are typically buyers as well once they sell their homes. So, if you're selling your home, you're usually trading up to that next home. And right now, with the economy the way it is, you're not sure whether or not your paycheck is going to come next month or the month after. So, stretching and going for that more expensive home may not be on the top of your list. It's better to kind of just sit back and wait for things to kind of ride out. So sellers are kind of holding back there. There's another big group of sellers that we're seeing not move as quickly, and that's people who downsize. So if you think of retirees or boomers, typically we might see them put their homes on the market, but right now we know that there were sort of virus outbreaks in places like assisted living facilities, places like retirement communities. It's just not safe to sort of leave the comfort of your home and to go into these sort of dense living environments. So we know that, people that would downsize aren't right now. And so right now we're seeing this huge divergence. We're seeing a big dip in inventory, and list prices go way, way up. And I just want to jump into the next slide, which is looking at California markets. So the story is pretty much the same, right? So list prices everywhere are super high, and in all markets except Sacramento, double-digit growth, right? So, and these are some of the most expensive markets in the city, as many of you know, and they're still really expensive. So, and a lot of that is the inventory story as well. But with Sacramento, we're still seeing positive growth, which I think is very telling. And nationally, I think list price is up about a little over 7%. So most of these markets are actually exceeding what we're seeing nationally. So in terms of the next slide, I just want to jump into this inventory issue a little bit more because it's a little more nuanced in the Bay Area. So this is daily activity. If you see the orange, that means it's negative year over year growth in inventory. And so, these are listings that come onto the market every day, right? So if you see that orange in San Diego, Los Angeles, and Sacramento, we definitely see that dip in inventory, huge dips in inventory. San Jose and San Francisco are a little bit of a different story. We're actually seeing inventory come back on the market. And that was actually true before the pandemic as well. We're starting to see things kind of come back online. We were really expecting a great home buying season because we're starting to see inventory creep back on. But the fact is that we're starting to see that inventory there, but we also saw prices really, really high. So, there's something really interesting going on here in the Bay Area. I think that the Bay Area in particular, even though we're seeing more stuff on the market, prices are still high because people still actually want to live here. So for everyone that actually wants to sell their home, there are actually a couple other people waiting in the wings to actually buy that. So the Bay Area is sort of an anomaly in that sense. And then if we look at the next slide, this is another metric we look at is to see how fast things are moving off the market. So this is the weekly inventory of homes that go from listed to pending. So that means, a lot more homes are actually going to pending, which means that they're moving a lot quicker off the market in places like San Diego, even Sacramento, Los Angeles is kind of creeping back up, and even San Francisco. Like I said, a lot of people are still looking to buy in San Francisco, even though we're seeing a little bit more inventory. And I will say that in general in San Francisco, you might see home prices and San Jose home prices, especially list prices, on the higher end because there's a little bit of a composition effect, right? You'll see more expensive homes go onto the market. And that's because those trade up buyers, if you're on the higher end of things, it's a little bit easier for you to make that move because you're a little more confident in your income and your ability to move up to the next home. So things are moving off the market quickly everywhere except San Jose. We're starting to see things, not quite move as quickly, but like I said, prices are still up, likely because people who are listing a little bit of higher end homes. So that's something we want to focus on as we look in the months to come. So, the next slide, I think I really want to get into this piece of the presentation, which is the rental market. I think this is the really interesting part of the housing market right now. And I think, the rest of our discussion will really be around, what's going on with people that are trying to make rent, right? So the rental market is actually cooling. That is the part of the market that is cooling quite a bit. That's no exception anywhere in California. We are seeing rent growth slow, but actually in San Francisco and San Jose, we're actually seeing rents decrease. So that is something that's really remarkable, especially in these markets that have been very expensive. We're actually starting to see rents go down. And there are a few reasons for this. And so if we look at the next slide, the rental market has sort of taken a different sort of hit because of rental market dynamics. But one point that I wanted to point out is that a lot of adults have actually moved home with their parents or their grandparents since the pandemic began. So we looked at data in March and April. So there's probably a lot more people since then, but about 2.7 million adults moved home. A lot of these people were in that 18 to 25 Gen Z age cohort. And what happens is that, people tend to move home when they're a little more footloose, they rent, right? So that cohort, about 75% of people rent in that cohort. So there are a lot of people that are moving home. And since then, there are a lot of people moving home for other reasons, help with childcare, et cetera. They want to be close to their families because, it's so hard to travel right now. So we're seeing that happen, and that sort of upended the rental market a little bit. The people that moved home, we kind of estimated what percentage of the housing market that was just in March and April, and it was about 1.5%. The housing market sounds small, but it would be a significant impact, especially in certain markets. So on the next slide, I think what we really want to talk about are industries that are impacted and those people that are having a hard time making their housing obligations. So, the industries that we know are impacted by the pandemic, we think the obvious ones, sort of retail, food services, arts and entertainment, they make up about 50% of all rental or housing obligations in the market right now. So, we know that there have been big impacts on people's ability to pay with income that has essentially stopped. And in the next slide, we actually look at, this is California in particular. So with those industries that I mentioned, retail, food, arts, and entertainment, most of the people in those industries are renters, right? And when you have people that are unemployed, it's very difficult for them to make rent. So I think this is something that's going to continue to bear on the rental market. And in the next slide, we do know that people have actually been pretty good at making their rent obligations right now. The National Multifamily Housing Council has said, over 80% of people have made a rental payment or a partial rental payment. And that's really because there was additional unemployment benefits, $600 a week. That's really going to help people make ends meet, even if they're facing unemployment. Obviously, we know that expired about 2 weeks ago. And what does that actually mean for people that are unemployed or people that are in industries that are sort of high contact industries that would normally have to interact with a lot of people and are likely to be the ones most affected by the pandemic and whose jobs are on the line? Well, if we look at this graph, that dark blue bar is the share of those industries that are considered severely rent burdened or spend more than 50% of their income on rent. And now when you take away that additional $600 a week, you have that light blue line, and suddenly in these markets, in those industries, you have almost 50% of people who are going to be severely rent burdened. So suddenly they're going to be spending a lot more of their income, whatever they have. And now it's, based on California unemployment benefits on rent. So clearly it's hitting certain industries and certain people disproportionately. It's having a big effect on the rental market. And that sort of wraps up my presentation. I'll turn it back over to the moderators and look forward to the rest of the discussion today.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was really, really good. Great data to help frame this conversation. I'm going to introduce now Director Velasquez. May of 2020, Gustavo was appointed by Governor Newsom to serve as Director of the California HCD Department. Velasquez was Senior Director at the Urban Institute, a renowned national research organization, and served for nearly 3 years as Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Velasquez worked in executive roles in the administration of DC mayors Anthony Williams, Adrian Fentry, and Vincent Gray. He also has nonprofit experience as Executive Director of the Latino Economic Development Center, which is a local community development organization in Washington, DC. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a master's in public administration. Welcome, Gustavo. Thank you for joining us. You are on mute. There you go.
Thank you, Dave, for that introduction. I appreciate the invitation. It's good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm in great company with Cheryl and this great data that she just presented, which as the new director, it's been only a bit over 3 months. It's very helpful. So I'm learning a lot from this meeting as well. Many of you may not know me, so I'm going to spend just about a minute or so to tell you just a little bit about myself, and then I'll touch briefly on COVID response. I think part of the theme this morning, as I was told, was to address, you know, the impact of COVID and the response from the state, and also elaborate on a quick point about housing shortage in the Bay Area. I have a slide towards the end of my opening remarks that I would like to explain. But so I come from a fair housing background. I worked on the design and implementation of the 2015 affirmatively furthering fair housing rule as assistant secretary for the office that was charged with designing and implementing the rule. And I mentioned that work not only because it's been a lot in the news lately, but also because that work that I did in the Obama administration, I think says a lot about my career, about my interest, what I want to focus on when working on housing policy, and certainly my aspirations as a matter of principles coming into this job here in California. And for those who may not have heard much about affirmatively furthering fair housing, is in a nutshell is really the connection between housing opportunities, where housing opportunities are created and how families thrive or not, especially low-income minority households. In other words, we know housing is essential to move us towards greater economic and social justice. Of course, economic mobility, we know that, but economic justice as well. And the housing market and the government regulating it, I believe must, with great intentionality, need to use both funding and also policy tools to make housing a foundation for opportunity, not just a building somewhere. So, you know, I think Cheryl started laying out sort of how the pandemic has tragically worsened the housing crisis and disproportionately affected communities most in need, even pre-pandemic. I mean, when she talks about the occupations, we know that low-income communities, working families have been affected really in two ways. One, they have either been affected by unemployment because of the industries they work in, you know, hospitality and services, but also a big chunk of that same sector of the population has been affected by the fact that they are essential workers, so has been affected by exposure to this public health emergency because they have to go to work, unlike many of us who can work from home. You know, they're the healthcare workers, they're the farm workers that are essential to our economy. So unfortunately, it's a repeated cycle, right? We've seen it before. We saw it with the housing bust over a decade ago. We saw it with the foreclosure crisis, the access to credit crisis, the rental housing shortage crisis, and now the public health crisis is the same group of people in our communities that are often disproportionately affected. But in the midst of this sort of bleak negative situation, I believe we can always find opportunities to correct inequities and continue to invest where it's most needed. So, so in the Newsom administration, you know, it was critical to respond really immediately to the pandemic with all the tools at our disposal. So let me just mention briefly some of the things that we immediately put in place. First of all, we did not slow down on the funding pipeline from the Department of Housing and Community Development. We continue, you know, knowing that pre-COVID, the situation with housing shortage was very difficult. We continue to move forward with the funding pipeline that helps developers work with local jurisdictions to increase production. We issue emergency guidance to owners, operators of affordable properties to allow, you know, greater flexibility, provide relief, as they were also severely affected by the public health emergency. On the area of farm worker housing, you know, you've seen lately in the news how farm worker communities have been very much affected by the pandemic. So we put in place, you know, additional support as well there. Earlier in July, it was, you know, very early in my tenure, we used, you know, over $100 million in emergency federal funding to local governments and continuums of care to address immediate needs to people experiencing homelessness and a great risk of infection. You may have heard about Project Roomkey, something the governor has spoken at length. It's one of its kind efforts to leverage federal and state funding to rent hotels and motels for some of the most vulnerable Californians, making sure that they were not any longer congregating, would move to non-congregated areas to avoid a spike in infection. That project has now turned into HomeKey, a new program built off of the Roomkey model. This program is a $650 million effort that combines federal, state, and philanthropic money to purchase hotels, motels, and other housing types, remodel them, and use them for interim and permanent housing. It's kind of like the silver lining of this whole terrible situation is using a lot of federal and state dollars to find permanent solutions under a first housing model for people experiencing homelessness. And of course, right now, you know, we're in the middle of a lot of negotiations with the legislature, working furiously to do what is possible to address the potential cliff. Cheryl mentioned, you know, the end of the supplemental unemployment benefits, but we see that coming. I mean, they left, the Senate in Washington, D.C. left with no solution being made. And so without seeing any commitment, again, from the Senate in D.C., we can't let the crisis just strike in front of our eyes. So it's been a lot of day by day. We're actually on time right now working on this effort to try to make sure that the state responds to what could be a very difficult situation very, very soon. Again, it's an issue of, you know, responding quickly, making sure that that we have the tools at our disposal. But I mentioned, you know, pre-COVID, you know, the situation was very dire in terms of increasing the production, preservation, and protection of affordable housing. The work that HCD does around RENA and providing support to regions and local jurisdictions around housing elements, technical assistance, enforcement if necessary. That's an area that I plan to focus heavily on during my time as director. And I was really looking recently at some data, if you can now show the slide, some data that I was looking at recently, and gives us, you know, some perspective about I will end my remarks with this slide. It's just a very opening reality that is on this slide, because it basically shows you what the state should be producing and what it has accomplished in what we call the fifth cycle, the fifth RHNA cycle, which is basically the last 8 years. What is the percentage of, let's say, performance or underperformance in this, of the state regarding production on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you can see what the Bay Area has accomplished. So it's just easier to see these two tables from the bottom moving up, because the bottom shows basically market rate going to moderate, and then low income and very low income. And so the state, as you can see, is doing quite well producing market rate housing. And certainly the Bay Area region is doing exceptionally well producing market rate housing at 100 and almost 44% of what they should have met, so exceeding the goals. As you can see, the numbers begin to dwindle as you move to moderate and then low income and very low income. I have to say the Bay Area region is the winner when it comes to producing very low income housing across the state at almost 90%. All the other regions are drastically lower than that. The state has an 11.4%. And I put this slide into context. I think it's related with my opening remarks about it's about production. You know, we have a housing shortage, but it's also about where you are producing. It's about meeting the needs across the income spectrum, and especially given the effect, the disproportionate effect in the pandemic on low-income communities. You can just, this gives you a sense about where the greatest need lies and where we should invest our resources and put emphasis on our policies that continue to move forward in the state. And you know, this is perhaps a call to action, you know, the Bay Area Council focusing the business leaders, you know, I think this gives you a sense about your, you know, what I hope is, you know, your influence and your convening power, and to ensure that we continue to meet the demand for the housing market across the income spectrum. But certainly this chart shows you where is the greatest need lies. So I will end with that. Again, thank you for inviting me, and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Director. Those are again great statistics to frame what we can talk about. It's amazing to see those gaps, and you know, to think if not for the economy supporting all that market rate housing production, I'm sure those affordable housing units would have been much even lower. So I'm going to go to questions now. We might stretch to 15 minutes here to 11:15, but please do start sending in questions through the Q&A chat, and we'll get to those as well. Cheryl, starting with you, what's the biggest surprise to you about how the pandemic's affected housing trends? And if you were willing to communicate your crystal ball, what would you expect to see in the for rent and for sale markets, say 6 months out?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think what's most surprising, especially if we focus, say, on the Bay Area, is that, you know, that the housing market is doing surprisingly well if you count sort of what's going on in terms of home prices. So, you know, in the Bay Area in particular, the fact that despite low inventory, you know, we're seeing home prices rise, and even with an increase in inventory, we're seeing prices rise, especially in San Jose. And I think that is a testament to the fact that there are still a lot of people that want to live here and have the ability to, you know, buy homes in, you know, what are essentially some of the most expensive markets in the country. So I think that's very surprising. And I think in the future, you know, it's hard to say. You know, I think if we kind of rewind 6 months from where we are today, that was pre-pandemic, no one would have ever sort of imagined where we'd be sitting right now. But in the next 6 months, you know, I think we're going to see more of this fallout from what's actually happening with the economy, and the fact that, you know, there are industries that are severely impacted by this pandemic. The rental market is going to be sort of further upended. I do believe that's going to happen in the next 6 months. And then if we kind of stretch out, a year from now, we're going to start to see other things take hold. So right now there are about, just under 4 million households in forbearance extension programs. What's going to happen when that ends? Are people going to be selling their homes so they can get out? Is that going to add more inventory and affect the for sale market? How we live at home and work at home. So, if people are still working from home, if kids are still not back in school, is that going to start to alter people's tastes and preferences in where they live and what kinds of homes they're going to live in? And I think that's something we want to keep our eye on as well.
Absolutely. I know many households, including mine, are facing school at home, what feels like indefinitely as we speak. Director Velasquez, you stepped in, to say the least, at a unique time to tackle the housing crisis. But coming into the role, how have your plans changed or your perspective changed given the pandemic's impacts?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I accepted this job, this was we could see some signs of the pandemic accelerating, but it wasn't certainly never predicted that it would get to this tragic state. So I knew I would be working hard to build upon the great work of HCD and implementing all the landmark changes that have occurred since the housing package passed in 2017. A lot of funding available from bond funding and other, and also lots of great new pieces of legislation around precisely RENA and housing elements, and just making sure that we would work very closely with local jurisdictions to dismantle barriers that prevent production and preservation of affordable housing from occurring. So certainly I had no idea on my first day I would be facing not only one crisis, but two, a housing crisis and a health crisis. So when COVID, hit, started seeing the numbers rise. We had to shift into emergency mode quickly to make sure we were keeping people housed. I mean, that was basically it. I mean, if anything, we talk about housing as a kind of lever, as an anchor to create greater opportunity for people, depending on where they live. The zip code really determines a lot. Based on where you are, access to jobs, transportation, healthcare, all of that. Certainly healthcare. I mean, housing is healthcare, and if you had any doubt, this pandemic, I think, was clearly an indication that we needed to make sure people had a place to live, to ensure we had rent forbearances, mortgage forbearances, so people could stay in place. Again, our entire staff, really the entire state, had to shift working at the offices to working at home. COVID has made our regular job that much more important, and we must continue to press forward with all the strategies set in law to be successful. So certainly we're seeing the pace of additional sweeping reform slowed by the crisis. The reforms that were happening before COVID. There is so much more work with the existing mandate, but I feel confident that if we keep our nose to the grindstone, all this effort will reap big dividends now and after the pandemic.
Thank you. Cheryl, I was wondering if we could look backwards a little bit, about 10 years actually, to the last recession. And you just covered the fact that this is disproportionately affecting certain industries, certain people, and the rental market versus the for sale market. So maybe this question's more appropriately geared towards the rental market. But how does this compare, just numbers-wise, the data, to what occurred during the previous downturn, the Great Recession?
Yeah, I think in the beginning of the pandemic, people were quick to say, is this another recession? Are we going to see what we saw 10 years ago? And I think the numbers have sort of borne out the fact that we're seeing quite the opposite, right? So the Great Recession, there was a huge glut of housing construction that was sort of indicating the run up to the bubble bursting. So when people couldn't make their, mortgage obligations, suddenly there was just a ton of inventory flooding the market. Home values tanked. So it was a very different situation. Then people were forced, a lot of people who lost their homes were forced into the rental market, which, in turn actually increased prices in the rental market. So the rental market is the one that actually benefited, I guess, if you want to say that, from what happened during the Great Recession. But right now we see really low inventory, which is quite the opposite, and home prices still on the rise, again, the opposite. In fact, I think nobody wanted to touch the housing market during the Great Recession because, there was no financing going into the housing market. There were no projects being built. And of course, those scars remain today. So, the construction industry was essentially decimated. People permanently left the construction industry. And that's some of the reasons why it's so expensive to build and why we have so little new inventory right now. And so, that's certainly the truth. But I think home builders today actually see the housing market as an opportunity. National Association of Home Builders just released their home builder sentiment survey. It was the highest the index has been in its 35-year history. The home builders see a lot of opportunity with all the pent-up demand and the fact that maybe people actually want to live in new homes because, there aren't people that have lived there before. And we're talking about, the spread of virus and things like that. So I think right now it's quite a sort of a different story in the housing market. And I think one thing I'll also mention is, when we talk about forbearance, a lot of people that lost their homes, we saw a wave of foreclosures because homes were underwater, right? They lost a lot of value. But now, in the past few years and even in the past couple of months, we've actually seen home values rise so much. So when people actually reach the end of their forbearance, they could sell their homes and walk away okay, right? They don't have to go through a foreclosure process necessarily if they can sell their homes. And like we see, there are a lot of people that actually want to buy homes right now.
That makes sense. And Director Velasquez, in terms of the last downturn, and in this one, irrespective of pricing right now, the rent data speaks for itself. It's pretty daunting. Land costs and construction costs are not moving. We hope they do, but it's certainly a slow period. It'll be slow for those markets to react, which means less production. And from your perspective, what lessons can we learn from previous downturns or your personal experience on how to deal with the headwinds on production of rental housing?
Well, if anything, it was the underproduction during the last recession that has left us with an even larger housing deficit today. So our focus in this administration at HCD is addressing that severe shortfall. And I think the slide that I brought to the meeting, I think shows the not only the severe shortfall across, except for market rate, but especially at the very low and extremely low income levels, where we're seeing least production. We always talk about sort of the 3P strategies: production, preservation, and protection. I don't believe the state is doing nearly enough in preservation. We need to have a statewide preservation strategy, I think. Protection, we know, Bay Area is prime example of that. A lot of neighborhoods in transition and continue to gentrify in spite of COVID. And Cheryl was mentioning that rents are decreasing, but I believe there'll be eventually some leveling off, and demand will rise as we transition out of COVID. And so I predict that we will see the market react upward again, rental market. And so we need to be very vigilant at the protection part also of housing, the anti-displacement strategies, things that I know San Francisco, San Jose, and other jurisdictions are experimenting with. But on production, no way to, the numbers are crystal clear enough. Those charts just show what is the underperformance in our production. We just need to, again, dismantle those barriers at the local levels that still exist to allow greater density to build in areas of where higher resources are available, near transit, in concert with our climate goals as well. We need to continue to move forward. And just this year, HCD predicts to put close to $1.5 billion in affordable housing production. So we got to continue moving forward in that direction.
Great, thank you. We're going to move to a few of the questions that have come in. And I will start, let's see, from Sophie Martin. How much truth is there behind the theory that with increased ability to work from home, urban Bay Area residents are fleeing for less expensive and less tense lifestyle markets, for example, Tahoe and other similar markets? Cheryl, I will address that one to you.
Yeah, I love this question because this premise of sort of cities kind of not being desirable anymore and everyone just fleeing the cities is a really intriguing question. So we, our economics research team at Zillow, we actually dove into this a little bit just to see whether or not sort of nationally we're seeing sort of cities dying and people running to places where they have more space, where they don't have to pay a premium to live in a city when everything is closed. And I think, the conclusion was that that theory is a little bit overblown. I'll talk a little bit more about the Bay Area in just a second. But, if you look at sort of the key metrics that we tend to look at in terms of home values, in terms of inventory, in terms of how fast the markets are moving, the suburban markets are not necessarily doing better than urban. They're about the same. Where we see a difference is rents, right? So rents are actually cooling more in urban areas than in suburban areas for some of the reasons that I already indicated. So, we're not really seeing a huge shift. It may happen at some point, but we're not seeing one right now. There are a few exceptions to that. So if we talk about certain markets, so San Francisco, the city itself, and Manhattan, we're actually seeing a lot more inventory on the market. So, we're basically talking about two of the most expensive markets, those two cities or those two localities in the entire country. So as you can imagine, like I said, that premium of living in a city that has all these amenities for you may not be worth it to some people. So we're starting to see some inventory kind of come into those markets. Are the cities dying? Not quite yet. We don't really know where people are moving to yet, especially if they're leaving San Francisco. It may be, if we look at the city of San Francisco versus the entire metro area, San Francisco has a lot more inventory. People could just be moving across the bay. It's not clear yet. People with more wealth may be actually buying second homes in vacation areas. But, I think the theory that the cities are dying, it's just not there yet. So that's what we're seeing.
Can I just make a quick comment about that, Dave? Because yeah. I think it's important to dispel myths, and Cheryl is right on target with that perception. There's another theory kind of bubbling up. I've seen articles here and there about the threat of density for public health issues like COVID. You remember that started in New York when New York was seeing, incredibly high numbers, and sort of the people, that use that as a way to begin creating this narrative that, we need to really stay away from density. It is a big threat. That's another type of myth that we just need to dispel. It had nothing to do with density. It has to do with the ability for the local and the state and the national public health system to respond effectively to a public health emergency like this. We saw that it was effective in the Bay Area, at least at the beginning. Then as things began to kind of loosen up, the infection rate started to climb up again. So that was proof, right? That it really isn't about density. It's more about the response of the public health system and people's attitudes and behavior. So I think it's important just to to keep reminding people what myth and what true is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think the data will prove that out. Well, you know, as it's hopefully talked about more, that it's human behavior, not the buildings people live in.
Dave, one question on that though, just sorry to interrupt, is I do you think there's also, maybe this is a question for both Cheryl and Gustavo, is that, you know, like it's like when there's an earthquake and people leave, they're like, I'm out, you know, and then there's like a couple years pass, everyone's like, what earthquake, you know, like, I mean, do you think that there's like a shelf life to people's, you know, really their memory about these issues as well, like a time span in which these things start to just, people move past it and it's in the rearview mirror emotionally for them?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, everything is cyclical. There will be a lot of scars. Cheryl used the word scars. You know, there are scars from economic recessions. There are scars from natural disasters. We're still living. I mean, I'm in the middle of a lot of funding that finally is coming from the federal government to support the disaster recovery of the 2017 and 2018 fires. There's still a lot of kind of rebuilding on that front. So there's scars from natural disasters. There's scars from economic recessions. This will be another big scar. It's gonna be a scar that is with us for many, many years. But at the end of the day, everything turns out to be cyclical.
Yeah, the psychological effect of 9/11 is always a good analogy of high-rise buildings and how quickly that dissipated. Director Velasquez, there's been a few questions on RHNA, so I'm going to address this one to you, and it's in regards to the Bay Area Cycle 6 RHNA period. Looks like 440-ish thousand units, and while 135% of the previous cycle, certainly less than many had hoped for, while it looks like Southern California got a 229% increase. I'm just hoping to learn more about the process rationale that HCD had to arrive at that number, so everyone has a better understanding.
Great, Dave. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I was obviously expecting that question at an event with Bay Area stakeholders. Look, I hear the disappointment. I've seen some of the articles about some groups kind of being very disappointed that the number wasn't higher. But let me just make sure people understand that that's due not to the RHNA methodology. I'm sorry, that is due to the RHNA methodology. And it is important for people to know that we use the same one for every region. You know, but obviously circumstances within each region are very different. I know we don't have a lot of time. I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but look, we start these projections with the number of households in a particular region by the end of the cycle. So we're projecting population increases 8 years out. We work with demographers, with our Department of Finance at the state. We then adjust for a region's vacancy rate, overcrowding, a buffer for housing likely to be lost within a cycle. And I think, you know, in the midst of COVID, that is an important consideration. That gets us to the total housing need. Then we kind of subtract out the number of today's existing housing within a particular region. And then we carve out, you know, the different income categories. That's why the chart that I put there before, you know, it goes to very low, moderate, and above moderate. I'm oversimplifying it, but you can think of the very low and low need as what a city must zone for at higher density, and moderate and above moderate, they can zone for at their choice. You know, could be high density, could be low density. But we also adjust for cost burden. Cost burden rate, and the higher income cost burden rates are higher than a comparable region rate or the national average. So it's a very very precise methodology that is is a matter of a statutory requirement that we follow. Keep in mind, you know, there were The reason why the numbers percentage-wise are much higher with the Southern California region, the largest region in the state, versus the Bay Area region is, there were higher population growth expectations in the SCAC region compared to the Bay Area region. Overcrowding, the rates were very different. The cost burden rates were very different. And again, personally, I wish the number would have been higher too. But it's not a matter of what I want or what people, would like to see. 441,000 units to be produced in the 8 years could have been higher. It's still a number that we need to work. We're going to be working very, very hard at achieving. And again, I use the opportunity of this question to talk to the members of the Bay Area Council to help with their convening capacity, with their influence as business leaders, because that number is going to be a number that we're already hearing from some local governments pushback for. So it's all, it's all balance, a balancing act. But I just want to very, very emphatic about the fact that these are numbers that we produce based on a very strict methodology, and you're always going to find differences between regions because regions are through very different economic circumstances and different projections when it comes to population growth.
Great, thank you, Director, for that. That's a very clear response to a question that I'm sure could have taken a long time to answer if we had it. One more for you, Cheryl, related to some of the demographic numbers you shared. This is really the younger versus, say the younger demographic, Gen Z category, 18 to 25 plus year olds, versus the upper wealthier residents who are both allegedly, both sort of, extreme ends of the age ranges are leaving, according to what you discussed. Is one of them more statistically significant? Are you as confident on both? And is there a rebound with the younger category related to the jobs and how they come back? Not that they're gone, it's just the concept of working at home versus being required to be in the office.
Yeah, we haven't looked at the data since the early days of the pandemic, so it's hard to say. I don't want to overstep here. And I want to note that, it wasn't necessarily an out migration that we saw. It was more just people moving back in at home. They could actually be, there could be people renting in San Francisco that move back home with their parents somewhere in this metro area. So it was just more about, this kind of idea of negative household formation. And so, I think the numbers were statistically significant across cohort. And we actually have a whole research brief on it, and it'll tell you where that data is from, which is, I believe, the current population survey in the US Census. That we can share with folks through the Bay Area Council, or you can check it out on zillow.com/research.
Great. Director Velasquez, I know you've been a champion of AFFH, the affirmatively further fair housing. There's been a lot of news at the federal level related to the reversal of those policies, and just curious to hear your thoughts on what California has in place to protect fair housing.
Well, California has codified in a statute requirements, principles, more importantly, that are very similar to those that are embedded in the 2015 Obama era affirmatively further fair housing rule. So yes, it was very both disappointed and predictable, the steps that the Trump administration took to dismantle the rule. But again, pieces of legislation like AB 6, I always get it. I'm still learning the number. There's so many numbers with legislation. I think it's 868 or 686. I think it's 868. You probably, Dave can correct me, but that was the 2018 law that passed in California that, again, codified in the state law requirements to affirmatively further fair housing. And those are not going to go away. And they're, for example, the work that we are we are doing and we will continue to do with local jurisdictions about their housing elements, not just how they plan to create incentives, modify land use and zoning and those kinds of things to increase availability of housing. It's just as important in the context of furthering fair housing to ensure that housing is created really across many types of communities, especially those when we're talking about affordable housing, those that are close to jobs, close to transit, close to amenities. Not continue to keep putting more and more affordable housing in high poverty neighborhoods, but to really take a balanced approach to both distressed neighborhoods where there is a revitalization strategy that can help families and communities, as well as in areas that are high resource or high opportunity. And so we are already working very closely to ensure that, again, those principles, those requirements are part of the housing elements that every jurisdiction in the state of California has to submit for approval. And so that's just one example through which our intentionality to AFFH continues. It's a matter of state law. It won't go away. And quite frankly, there will be, I think, not in the not so distant future, the opportunity to put as a matter of national policy these things back in order. And so I look forward to that day, as probably some of you.
Wonderful. And it's AB 686. Thanks to Xiomara for providing me with that. That's your last contribution, Xiomara. We're going to miss you so much. And I'm gonna try to end with one last question. It's related, I suppose. You mentioned earlier $1.5 billion from HCD to support housing investment. And if you could just help us understand sort of big picture, what's this targeting? What's the focus of those dollars? And more specifically, how should we in the Bay Area think about those investments, stimulating activity here?
So again, the 2017 housing package gave us the opportunity as a state to continue to invest a tremendous. It was kind of a hopefully not a one-time. There will be, of course, hopefully many more opportunities. But for the moment, certainly a one-time opportunity to invest in the creation of affordable housing. The governor has been from day one firmly committed to increase the availability of housing, the production goals. He dedicated basically almost in its entirety his last state of the state address earlier this year to housing and homelessness. So he's committed, and he wants to make sure that we are very thoughtful about how we invest those resources. And it has to be data driven, right? It has to be policy, it has to be grounded on evidence. And the evidence, again, going back, I sound like a broken record, but going back to my tables about the state, the Bay Area, where production is happening, where the largest gaps exist, I think that's going to be, as you will see going forward, the orientation. But again, I don't dispute the fact that housing has to be created and available across the income spectrum. So we have 29 programs at the department that will use some kind of combination of incentives, funding for different populations, where different areas of need. And so we already have on our website, for those who want to see, hcd.ca.gov, a list of how that funding will trickle out throughout the year, and this year and next year. We've already created an advanced calendar of how that funding will become available. So look forward to seeing a lot of affordable housing developers, profit, nonprofit, to continue to move us in the right direction. Great.
We look forward to learning more. And I think I'm going to wrap us up here. It's 11:30. Thank you so much to both panelists. We really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I'm sure all the participants are very grateful for your time and your willingness to share both the data as well as your thoughts, opinions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone have a great day. Thank you.